Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon when you're watching this webinar. My name is Dave Nagel, and I'm really excited, as always, to talk and share with my colleagues from Valley View Community School District. And this is an overview of common formative assessments. And for the most part, this would be for folks entering into cohort probably 3 or 4, or either the special education, elementary, or middle school cohorts that'll be coming up with CFA 2.0 workshop seminar sometime here this fall. So this is just an overview of the process. There'll be about 5 or 6 of these webinars that are just pre-recorded, a chance to sort of flip the professional development that we talk a lot in the classroom around, flipping the learning, and a chance to give everyone a chance to kind of get an idea of what's going to happen during these 4 days. This one will just be a short, brief overview. This is one of the few webinars that will not have a working handout. With the other ones, there will be, and a chance for you to kind of complete some activities and things of that nature. So kind of jumping right in, and while we will jump into the specific process that Larry has outlined, one of the big takeaways or big ideas that we'll talk about in the process, that term big idea, conceptual understanding, a takeaway for everyone is any assessment comes down to 3 points: purpose, evidence, inference. In the morning on our way to work, we might have a purpose to get there on time and to have a venti pike with 2 shots of espresso at a local Starbucks. It's possible on our way we would stop at a Starbucks and make an inference from evidence when there's 16 people in line and 14 cars in the drive-thru that we won't be able to meet our purpose. And then what do? We just drive another 2 blocks, go to the next Starbucks. But my point is, we do this in life all the time. We have a purpose, and then we determine when do we have enough evidence to make an inference. Same thing should happen in the classroom. Our purpose is the focus of that learning intention, success criteria, that unit of study, that daily lesson. And then we need to gather enough evidence to make an inference into student learning. And sometimes that inference is more quantitative, but a lot of times it's qualitative. And so this is probably going to be a chance for all levels, but certainly secondary at times when we might realize we grade too much. We try to gather too much information or don't gather the right information to make that proper inference. And there's another overarching metaphor that I will use a lot. When you go to see your physician, whether they are a male or female, usually your doctor does not give you a series of tests and then assess you. They actually assess you first and then determine what tests you actually might need. And so really when we talk about that term assessment, we will, and those of you that have been through the cohorts already, know that that was kind of a big push. It's not just the technical side of writing the actual CFA or the actual assessment or test that we will administer to the students, but really realizing why we are doing what we are doing. And we can lean on one of the visible learning mind frames that's been a overarching element in Valley View, which is we should see assessment as feedback to us. We should be assessing our students so we know what to do next, so we know what our next teaching step is. Doesn't mean we can't put it in the grade book. It doesn't mean we can't use it for those purposes, but most importantly, it's to help me know what to do next as a teacher, as an educator. And one of the really important things, and those of you that have been through the visible learning training, you've seen this example before. This comes from Michael Barber's work. In life, we try to learn things very fast to get to that comfort zone. We try to get to that level of understanding where it's easy. It's why we have the kids learn their math facts. So 5 times 3 is 30 and 3 times 5 is 15. They won't lean on their processing of the math facts when they get to a difficult problem. But in life, whenever we try to do something new, whether we're students or we're adult learners, it's not that there's an implementation dip, but we can't process and be productive at the same time. And so one of the things that you hear a lot, and Adam has said it, and Karen Flores as well during the trainings and seminars, is to allow yourself to be a learner. There'll be some things that push you and challenge you, but to just trust the process and allow yourself to learn and think about why you are doing what you're doing. And this is something that hasn't happened with teachers in professional development near enough. We would never take our 7th graders up to the room upstairs and 4 times a year give them the math lesson and assume that they will get it. Just like we can't assume that just after 4 days of CFA 2.0 seminar work or training or workshop that everybody's going to have it down exactly the same. So it'll really be important that you come to these days as a learner and allow yourself to do so. And certainly I understand and respect when you are giving up time away from the classroom. Not only is it time away from the instructional sequence, any level, we have things to clean up. We have lesson plans to create before and parents to call after for the students who didn't behave for the sub and things of that nature. So something else to think about as you come into these 2 days, and certainly 4 days actually, 2 days usually initially, but totally respecting the commitment everyone is giving to this process. A lot of you who will be coming to these sessions might have met me or I've worked with you before during the visible learning work. But a little bit about me, my entire career as a practitioner was in the secondary level. For about 14 years, I was in one district similar to size to Valley View as a middle school and high school science teacher and then administrator. But one thing that I'm very fortunate and I really am proud to share is that I've spent pretty much my entire career working with common formative assessments. Larry Ainsworth came to my former district in 1998 working with us as teachers and unwrapping the standards and prioritizing and developing the initial CFA process. And I used that in my classroom, then eventually became a building administrator and then oversaw some elements of the district of implementing CFA 2.0. And so I've been involved with the work for a very long time, certainly presenting it now for well over a decade. I've twice been certified in Visible Learning Plus, which is John Hattie's work. And I'm very fortunate that he was a strong influence when I wrote my first book on secondary grading practices, which really isn't on grading as much as it is on feedback, and it's not really necessarily just for high school teachers. And I do have my own company, NZJ Learning, which just simply stands for Nicholas, Zachary, and Jacob, who are my three boys, because I wasn't very creative to come up with a better name. But again, some of you have had a chance to know me, but I wanted to share a little bit about my background. And while this is not an interactive webinar by any stretch of the imagination, I did want to commit to some interactivity. So if you have a thought or a question anytime, text me. There's one of my two emails. I'll share my other one at the end of the session. And then if you're a Twitter person, you can follow on Twitter as well. But please don't hesitate to ask a question. You don't have to go through your administrator or Karen or Adam or anyone else. You can come straight to me, and certainly looking forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas. I want to just share this quick quote from James Popham. Formative assessment is a planned process, which means we think it out ahead of time, where we try to elicit evidence from the students so that way teachers can adjust their ongoing instruction or students can adjust their learning strategies or tactics. James Popham, who's professor emeritus at UCLA, by far is the world's leading expert in assessment. And one of the reasons why I underlined and yellowed the planned process, when you come to the CFA 2.0 work, I will always challenge you to be creating an assessment that you're not going to give for 3 or 4 months down the road. So you have time to look through it and think about it and plan it out and not just use what's at the end of a textbook from Houghton Mifflin when they would never been in your classroom and never known how you taught and what you focused on. Well, it takes time to go through that, and you have to get an initial start and then revise it. So I think a lot of folks who have walked through, and the feedback has been very clear for all the cohorts, that the planning that goes into the assessment process really does take time, and there's going to be time devoted to this. But the more we think about it ahead of time, the more we can feel good about the quality of evidence we're gathering from the assessments that we're putting in front of our students. Everyone will walk out with and utilize Larry's 2.0, Common Formative Assessments 2.0 text, as well as the training manual. Adam Herder's probably rolling his eyes because I've been very intentional not to call it a training manual. It's a resource manual, very full of resources and examples that we won't necessarily follow cover to cover, but you will walk out with two very useful resources to take away. A couple other points here in this first webinar. The first one is, what are CFAs? What are common formative assessments? What does that term mean? So some overarching points. They're aligned pre and post assessments within a unit of study. And a unit of study is around 2 to 4 weeks. And certainly we have some district common assessments that we're not abandoning in Valley View, but those have been teacher created. And this process has opened the eyes of many to go how we could go back and tweak some of those. Collaboratively designed. Common means there's more than one of us that are going to be putting them in place and implementing them. And they can be for a grade level, a course team, and they're administered throughout the year for the students. But again, that alignment between the pre and the post, and we're going to talk about that alignment. At times it will be a mirror, almost the exact same pre and the exact same post, where we will use a growth measurement if we needed to, but other times that alignment might not necessarily be a mirror. We might focus on a few prerequisite skills that if the students have the start of a unit, they're going to be very successful. And if they don't have them, we certainly have to intervene, and we might not be able to compare at all times the pre and the post. That will depend on a unit-specific set of skills we're focusing on. And they're designed to assess particular understanding of the learning intentions. I'm going to go back to that point about purpose, evidence, inference. What is my true purpose of this assessment, of this unit? And if it is focusing more on main idea or figurative language, then spelling and commas aren't going to be that important. Not that we would ignore them, but I'm really focusing on what were the learning intentions for that unit that align to the success criteria so they can provide feedback for what the students know, what they need to still learn, and to guide the specific actions for the teacher. And at the end of the day, all of us who are listening to this webinar are busy. We're all time poor. This should help us and empower us to make sure what we're doing is giving us the best information in the least amount of time, because none of us want to waste that resource that teachers always value, which is time. Quickly want to walk you through the design steps, Larry's 10-step process. What you see here in blue is what we'll really focus on during those first 2 days. We'll identify for a unit the priority standards and unwrap them and look at the specific rigor targets that are built into the standards. And then there's been sort of the big, I think, eye-opener for some folks who might have done unwrapping before, but what that really means. We'll determine the big ideas, the conceptual understandings, and what are the essential questions we want to ask students. Now, for most districts, we jump right then actually to step 5. We kind of hold off on the learning intentions and success criteria because few districts have gone as extensively as Valley View has with success criteria and teacher clarity. Doesn't mean with the groups we'll be working with that we can't jump to that step. But in all honesty, what you see here in blue is getting the first draft of the assessment started and created, including the scoring guides and even a little bit of the pre-assessment on those first 2 days. And then the next 2 days, we actually come back and work on here are these steps that are in red. Certainly, we revisit the learning intentions and success criteria. But if you look down at the bottom left at step 8, evaluate and revise assessment questions for quality. We can't revise items unless they're written. And some of the feedback we've received, and with the first few cohorts that have gone through a little bit, the more that they had started and the more time was devoted during the first 2 days for a started product, the better did not only teachers feel about what they accomplished, the easier it is for them to come back and revisit and revise those. Look at the learning progressions. What are the things students need to progress through in that instructional sequence? And then that last step, those are the things that we'll design that we should be doing on an ongoing basis. The progress checks. What are the things we should look for in learning? Not just that we'll give the students an exit ticket, but what should we see on their exit ticket that demonstrates evidence of learning? And those are the things we should bring to our PLC collaborative meetings. Not just completed papers and data and charts, but evidence of student learning. And so it really is much more than just designing the assessment. It really is a small example of writing a little bit of and evaluating the curriculum that we're using. Doesn't mean we're going to abandon the curriculum that we have in place, but we might be more intentional with how we use it. For example, at the secondary level, I've made this comment a lot. Students often, unfortunately, erroneously feel that they're learning To Kill a Mockingbird, when really they might be learning about complex characters. And so if I'm a teacher and I'm focusing on complex characters, I'm going to use To Kill a Mockingbird just as much as I might have before, but more intentionally with certain pieces. It's about learning how Atticus developed over time, not whether or not you remember that Zebo was the garbage man. I happen to know that because I really enjoy the text. It was a great piece of literature, but what's more important is they're seeing their development of Atticus over time, because if they don't quite understand that complex character development, but we focus on that in that unit, in the next unit, they might do so with a different text. So I just wanted to provide just a little bit of an overview so you see that it is much more than just writing the assessment, although in the first few days, it's just getting it started. And I will say one of the big pieces is walking out with as much of a completed draft assessment as possible that you're not going to implement the next day. You're going to have time to come back and revisit and revise. And as kind of just a little bit more of an overview, on a simplified version, we have our CFA pre-assessment, we have our clear learning intentions and success criteria, and then we look at what are those progress checks along the way so we can monitor for learning, so we can make the right interpretations and adjustments. We can be more decisive in how we make instructional adjustments, and at times, maybe not overreact, because we'll realize it's not that students got it. Are they getting it? And as teachers, sometimes we get so busy and we try at times, and it's not our fault, it's not your fault, that there's this pressure to get through certain amounts of curriculum by a certain date, as opposed to where are students in their learning by this date to determine where they're at, but not as a stage that we should panic or overreact. And then the last thing that will come into the process is halfway through the unit, we'll determine what we call the bridge. We can't go into a unit and say it's going to take me 4 weeks to teach it. We don't know where the learners are as they come in. Now, what we can do is say we've taught this before, and so it's going to take around 4 weeks. which means it's going to take anywhere from about 3.5 to 5. And that bridge between units is that time for reteaching of the essential elements of the curriculum and the instructional objectives that students need to have at every grade level. And what we might realize is halfway through the unit, yeah, they're not quite getting it, but we're focusing on this standard and this skill in another unit down the road, so it's less important to revise and reteach. Other times you might realize this is essential for the next unit. So teachers are given time to plan and think about where do we put in the correct amount of breathing room, the correct amount of time to reteach and intervene and provide enrichment for students that are proficient. But this has been a big selling point because it really should be in place for teachers to design along the way when they need a little bit of time between units, but they can't predetermine that before the students come into the classroom at the start of the unit. A couple other final points. What you'll walk away with is a deeper understanding of some foundational assessment practices, not just the actual test writing itself. But certainly in cohort 3, it was very clear that they felt, based on the evaluations, that they walked out with some better tools to not just use in the actual long CFA version, but on a day-to-day basis in questioning of students, and verbal questioning and written questioning and short quizzes and things like that. And those apply specific tools that you can apply in your classroom the very next day. There'll be things that take a while to develop, but you should, if you're going to give up 2 days or 4 days, certainly out of your classroom, things that you can use that will save you time. A completed common formative assessment, and I put a few asterisks there because you'll understand over time what that looks like. And then some predetermined look-fors. What should we think ahead of time? What are some common misconceptions students have that we should look for in the evidence they produce to us? And that's a shift in thinking, because I'm not writing items so that they can eliminate 2 choices and make the best guess. I want to write items so they really have to be challenged to show me what they know or possibly don't know. And the more I know about their learning or understanding or misconceptions, the more I can be more decisive in my reteaching. And that's the one thing most teachers want. We're definitely very busy, but almost all of us, in fact, I'll just say all of us, care about our students and we want to help them in the best way possible. So sometimes we have to figure out the best way to guide our questioning, whether it's verbally or on paper pencil or on an assessment, to determine their understanding so we know whether or not they're really getting it or how to make adjustments. And as a final footnote, and I could be off on a couple of the dates, but I want to be really clear. There's a reason why multiple cohorts are going through the work. Far too often in districts as large as Valley View, some folks go through a CFA process and some folks go through something else, but been very intentional planning with the different amounts of teachers that are going to be coming through. So there's a shared assessment language of learning, not only for the language and the process, but now we can have teachers who are developing assessments with the same format, the same concepts, the same strategies built in place. So a teacher at Lucansett can be using assessment tools from Humphrey because they were designed in the same format. Not to shoehorn anybody or to make it so scripted and too structured and rigid, but far too often we don't have the ability to learn and share from each other. So again, on the asterisks, I could be off specifically on some of the dates. Most of the groups are starting here in the fall and going into the spring. And then 2 specific special education teacher groups, elementary or middle secondary, that will use the process to design the same kinds of assessments for their students, but also make sure we use it to really even go deeper and dig into some student understanding, misconceptions, and also how we look at writing individual education plans and things of that nature. And then finally, there's already been one group, but there'll be another one that goes through a certification process to have the work be sustained and be ongoing in Valley View, not just on a technical level in terms of the assessment writing themselves, but on a level of understanding, so we have more educators that are sharing the same kind of language and being coached and guided in the right way that provides what I would call structured freedom, the right amount of malleability where we can be adjustable because our content, our specifics in terms of our subject matter is a little bit different or our grade level, but we're still certainly on the same playing field and using that shared language of learning across the board with the educators and leaders. And finally, I want to go back to 3 main points of any assessment: purpose, evidence, inference. When we focus on that, it takes away some of the confusion that we have in what we do on a day-to-day basis in our classrooms. What's my purpose, and when do I have enough evidence to gather the right kinds of information to make a quality inference? There'll be multiple webinars for you to kind of preview and get ready for the days and then to have as ongoing, but I really, as always, appreciate the opportunity. I'm so honored and value the relationship with my colleagues in Valley View. Thoughts or questions? My other email, davenagel, vlplus@gmail.com. Please send them to me. certainly visit corwin.com if you have any other interest in digging deeper into some of the CFA work or other services they provide. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing a lot of you here this fall. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk very soon.